Detective Inspector Lisa Chen was having her morning coffee when her phone buzzed with an urgent message. The call came from her boss at New Scotland Yard, and his voice carried that familiar tension she knew meant trouble. "Lisa, drop everything. We need you here now," Chief Inspector Williams said without any greeting. "The big boss has been spotted." Lisa nearly dropped her cup. Everyone in law enforcement knew about the big boss. Real name Victor Romano. He was London's most wanted criminal, running everything from smuggling operations to high-end fraud. But what made him special wasn't just his crimes. It was how invisible he had become. For 3 long years, not a single reliable sighting. No photos, no witnesses, nothing. Victor had vanished like smoke, leaving his criminal empire running itself while he stayed hidden. Some officers even joked that maybe he had left the country or died, but Lisa never believed that. Men like Victor didn't just disappear. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in a briefing room filled with serious faces. Maps of central London covered the walls, and red pins marked locations around Whitehall and Westminster. The atmosphere felt electric with urgency. "Yesterday evening, our surveillance team caught something interesting." Williams began, clicking a remote. A grainy security camera image appeared on the screen. "This man was spotted near the government buildings on Whitehall." Lisa leaned forward, studying the image. The figure was tall, wearing an expensive coat, but his face was partially hidden by shadows in the angle. Still, something about his walk, his posture felt familiar. "We ran facial recognition through every database we have," Williams continued. 92% match for Victor Romano, the highest confidence level we've ever had. "But why now?" Lisa asked. "After 3 years of silence, why risk coming out into the open?" "That's what worries us," said Agent Thompson from MI5, who had been quietly sitting in the corner. "Our intelligence suggests something big is planned for next week." Lisa felt her stomach tighten. Next week was Trooping the Color, the Queen's official birthday celebration. Thousands of people would gather at Horse Guards Parade, including foreign dignitaries, tourists, and members of the royal family. If Victor was planning something during that event, the consequences could be enormous. "We have additional surveillance from this morning," Thompson added, switching to a new image. Same individual, this time near Horse Guards itself. He spent 40 minutes walking around the area, taking photos like a tourist. But Lisa knew Victor wasn't any tourist. Every move he made was calculated, planned down to the smallest detail. If he was studying Horse Guards Parade, he had a specific reason. "I've been tracking Victor for 12 years, Lisa said, standing up to get a better look at the maps. "He doesn't take risks unless the reward is massive. And he never ever operates alone." Williams nodded grimly. "That's exactly what we're afraid of. We've already increased security around all government buildings, but we need to figure out what he's really planning." Lisa studied the timeline on the whiteboard. Victor's sightings formed a pattern. Always near government buildings, always during busy times when security cameras would struggle to get clear shots. He was being careful but not completely invisible, almost like he wanted to be seen. "Sir, I think we need to consider something," Lisa said slowly. "What if being spotted isn't an accident? What if he wants us to know he's here?" The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. If Victor was deliberately showing himself, it meant he was confident enough in his plan to risk exposure. That level of confidence was terrifying. Thompson pulled up another screen showing the layout of Horse Guards Parade. The ceremony attracts over 10,000 spectators. International media coverage, members of parliament, foreign ambassadors, and obviously, the royal family. Lisa traced the security perimeter with her finger. Horse Guards was a fortress during major ceremonies with multiple layers of protection. But Victor had proven before that no security was perfect if you understood how it worked. "We need to assume he has inside information," Lisa said. "Someone is feeding him details about our security arrangements." Williams assigned teams immediately. Some would review all personnel with access to ceremony security protocols. Others would analyze every second of surveillance footage from the past week. Lisa would lead the primary investigation, using her years of experience tracking Victor to predict his next move. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Lisa remained staring at Victor's photo on the screen. She had come close to catching him twice before, but he had always stayed one step ahead. This time felt different, though. This time he was taking risks. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner, Detective Sergeant Kevin Park. "Heard about the briefing. Need backup?" Lisa quickly typed back. Meet me at Horse Guards in 20 minutes. Bring the surveillance equipment. She gathered her files and headed for the door, her mind already working through possibilities. Victor Romano was many things: ruthless, intelligent, careful, but he wasn't reckless. If he was showing himself now after 3 years in hiding, something major was about to happen. The question wasn't whether Victor was planning something at Trooping the Color. The question was what exactly he was planning, and whether they could stop him before it was too late. Lisa had 5 days to find answers, and she knew that 5 days might not be enough. As she walked through the corridors of New Scotland Yard, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was already several moves ahead of them, but this time she was determined to be ready for him. The security control room at Westminster looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dozens of monitors showed live feeds from cameras placed throughout central London. Detective Sergeant Kevin Park sat beside Lisa, both of them studying hours of footage with tired eyes. There, Kevin pointed to monitor number 7. Same group of men, third time today. Lisa watched as 4 well-dressed individuals walked casually past the Treasury building. They looked like businessmen heading to meetings, but something felt wrong about their behavior. Real businessmen didn't stop every few steps to look around so carefully. Run it back, Lisa said, leaning closer to the screen. Watch how they move. Kevin rewound the footage, and this time Lisa noticed what had bothered her. The men weren't just walking. They were measuring distances with their steps. One man counted quietly while walking from the street corner to the building entrance. Another timed something on his watch, probably calculating how long it took security guards to complete their patrol routes. They're mapping the area, Lisa realized, her detective instincts clicking into place, looking at response times, measuring distances between security checkpoints. The pattern was becoming clear now. These weren't random tourists or lost businessmen. This was professional reconnaissance, the kind of detailed intelligence gathering that only happened before major criminal operations. Meanwhile, across town at MI5 headquarters, Agent David Miller was dealing with his own puzzle. His team had been monitoring communications around central London, looking for any suspicious radio chatter or encrypted messages that might be connected to Victor's return. What they found was strange. Lots of encrypted messages were being transmitted, but all using different systems. Some were sent through secure phone apps, others through military-grade radio equipment, and some through methods so sophisticated that MI5's computers couldn't even identify the technology being used. It's like they're testing our ability to intercept, Miller explained to his supervisor over the phone. Different encryption methods, different transmission times, different locations. Someone is very carefully checking how good our surveillance really is. This worried Miller more than a direct threat would have. If Victor's organization was testing British intelligence capabilities, it meant they were planning something that required them to know exactly how the authorities would respond. Back at Westminster, Lisa and Kevin had identified a disturbing pattern in the surveillance footage. The same groups appeared at specific locations at exactly the same times each day. Government buildings, tourist attractions, security checkpoints, all being studied with military precision. The timing was too regular to be coincidental. These teams were following carefully planned schedules, probably coordinated by someone with extensive experience in planning complex operations. Lisa had seen this kind of systematic approach before, and it always meant trouble. Kevin, pull up yesterday's footage from Horse Guards, Lisa said, remembering the famous parade ground where next week's royal ceremony would take place. The camera showed the typical daily scene at Horse Guards parade. Tourists took photos while guards in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats marched back and forth in ceremonial formation. Families with children watched the spectacle, and tour guides explained the history of the location to groups of international visitors. Everything looked perfectly normal until Lisa spotted him. A tall man in an expensive gray coat stood at the edge of the crowd, but he wasn't watching the ceremony like everyone else. His eyes moved constantly, studying the building's windows, counting the number of guards, timing their movements with a small device in his hand. Even from the grainy security footage, Lisa could tell this man was different from the casual tourists around him. His posture was alert, professional. He stood like someone accustomed to dangerous situations, someone who had spent years learning to notice details that others missed. "Freeze it there," she said, her pulse quickening. "Enhance the image." Kevin worked his technical magic using computer software to clean up the video and make the image clearer. Slowly, the man's features became more visible. The facial structure, the way he carried himself, the expensive clothing. Everything matched what they knew about Victor Romano. He's not hiding anymore, Kevin observed, studying the enhanced image. It's almost like he doesn't care if we see him. That observation sent a chill through Lisa. Victor had survived as London's most wanted criminal by being invisible, by never leaving traces that could lead back to him. If he was now allowing himself to be caught on security cameras, it meant he was confident enough in his plan to risk exposure. That confidence was terrifying. Lisa's phone rang, interrupting her analysis. Agent Miller from MI5 was calling with news that made the situation even more complicated. "We've intercepted something interesting," Miller said without preamble. "Someone has booked the entire top floor of the Langham Hotel for next week. The penthouse suite there overlooks Horse Guards Parade directly." Lisa felt her stomach tighten. The Langham was one of London's most exclusive hotels, the kind of place where wealthy foreigners stayed when they wanted privacy and luxury. More importantly, its location provided a perfect view of the parade ground where the royal ceremony would take place. "When was the booking made?" Lisa asked. 6 weeks ago, paid through 3 different offshore companies. We traced the payments back through shell corporations registered in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland. Classic money laundering setup. This meant Victor had been planning his operation for months while staying completely invisible to British authorities. The recent sightings weren't mistakes or signs that he was getting careless. They were part of a carefully timed reveal, like an actor stepping onto a stage when his cue arrived. Kevin pulled up architectural plans of the Langham Hotel on his computer screen. The penthouse had massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing directly toward Horse Guards Parade. Someone standing in that room would have an unobstructed view of the entire ceremony area, including the reviewing stands where the royal family would be seated. "We need surveillance on that hotel," Lisa said, already thinking through the logistics. "But carefully. If Victor suspects we know about the penthouse, he might change his plans or disappear again." "Already working on it," Miller replied. "We're positioning surveillance equipment in the office building across the street. High-powered cameras and listening devices. But Lisa, there's something else you need to know. Hotel security footage shows Victor isn't alone up there." Lisa's blood ran cold. Victor operating alone was dangerous enough. Victor with a team of professionals was a nightmare scenario that could threaten thousands of innocent people. How many people are we talking about? At least 6 that we can identify from the hotel's elevator cameras. All men, all appearing to be in excellent physical condition. These aren't street criminals or amateur thieves, Lisa. These are professionals with military or security backgrounds. The implications were staggering. Victor had assembled a team of experts for whatever he was planning. People with the skills and experience to execute complex operations under pressure, probably including former soldiers or intelligence operatives who had gone freelance. As evening approached, Lisa found herself standing on the roof of New Scotland Yard, looking across London toward the area where she knew Victor was preparing his operation. The city looked peaceful and normal, with office workers heading home and tourists enjoying the mild weather. None of them knew that somewhere in that maze of buildings and streets, one of Britain's most dangerous criminals was putting the final pieces of his plan into place. The thought of all those innocent people going about their lives, unaware of the threat developing around them, made Lisa feel the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed constantly throughout the evening with updates from various surveillance teams. More reconnaissance groups spotted near government buildings. Additional encrypted communications intercepted but not decoded. Suspicious activity reported at 3 different hotels around Westminster, suggesting Victor was using multiple locations to confuse their investigation. "He's creating chaos," Lisa realized during a late-night phone call with Kevin. "Multiple locations, multiple teams, multiple radio signals. We don't know which threat is real and which is just meant to distract us." "Classic Victor Romano strategy," Kevin agreed from his position monitoring communications. "Remember that bank robbery in 2018? He set up fake operations at 5 different locations, but only one was the real target. By the time we figured out which bank he was actually hitting, he was already gone with £2 million. This pattern of creating multiple false leads while hiding the real operation was Victor's signature approach. He was a master of misdirection, capable of making law enforcement agencies chase shadows while he executed his actual plan without interference. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Victor's confidence, his willingness to show himself on security cameras after 3 years of perfect invisibility. Men like him didn't take such risks unless they were absolutely certain of success, which meant either his plan was so well designed that failure was impossible, or there was something fundamental about the situation that she wasn't understanding yet. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. Lisa was sitting in her office at New Scotland Yard, surrounded by files and surveillance photos, when Detective Constable Amy Rodriguez knocked on her door. Amy looked worried, carrying a tablet computer that displayed what appeared to be financial records. "Inspector, I think we have a serious problem," Amy said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind her. "I've been checking the backgrounds of everyone with access to ceremony security protocols like you asked me to do." Lisa looked up from the surveillance photos she had been studying. "What did you find?" "Something that doesn't look right at all," Amy replied, setting the tablet on Lisa's desk. "Look at these bank records." The screen showed financial statements for Sergeant Michael Barnes, a 15-year veteran of the Palace Security Detail. Lisa had known Barnes by reputation. He was considered reliable, professional, the kind of officer who took his duties seriously and never caused problems for his supervisors. But the bank records told a different story. Large cash deposits had been made to Barnes's account every month for the past 6 months. Each deposit was for exactly the same amount, £4,000, always made at different bank branches across London. "How much total?" Lisa asked, though she was already calculating the numbers in her head. £24,000 over 6 months, Amy replied. "But Inspector, that's not the strangest part. Look at the timing of these deposits." Amy scrolled through the records, highlighting dates. The deposits were made like clockwork, always on the 15th of each month, always in cash, never at the same bank branch twice. It was exactly the kind of pattern that professional criminals use to avoid triggering automatic banking alerts. This is textbook money laundering technique, Lisa realized. Someone has been paying Barnes regularly for information, and they're being very careful about how they do it. Lisa felt that familiar sensation she got when a case was about to break open. After days of chasing shadows and analyzing surveillance footage, they finally had something concrete. Evidence of corruption inside the security system protecting the royal family. "Where is Sergeant Barnes right now?" she asked. "On duty at Buckingham Palace, working on preparations for Saturday's ceremony. But Inspector, I dug deeper into his personal situation, and I think I understand why this might be happening." Amy pulled up another file on her tablet, this one containing medical records and insurance claims. Barnes's daughter Emma was diagnosed with leukemia 14 months ago. She's only 12 years old. Lisa studied the medical documents, and the pieces of a tragic story began falling into place. Emma Barnes had been receiving treatment through the National Health Service, but her condition was severe. The standard treatments weren't working effectively, and private specialists were recommending experimental therapies not covered by government insurance. "Look at these private medical bills," Amy continued, showing Lisa invoices from exclusive cancer treatment centers. Experimental medications, specialized treatments, consultations with international experts. The costs are enormous, well beyond what a police sergeant could afford on his salary. Lisa found herself looking at a situation she had encountered before in her career. A good man facing an impossible choice between his duty and his family. Victor Romano was an expert at finding people in desperate circumstances and exploiting their vulnerabilities for his own purposes. "We need to speak with Barnes immediately," Lisa said, grabbing her jacket. "But carefully. If he's been feeding information to Victor's organization, we need to understand exactly what he's told them." 20 minutes later, Lisa and Kevin were driving through the gates of Buckingham Palace, past the famous red-uniformed guards and into the administrative areas where security preparations for the royal ceremony were being coordinated. They found Sergeant Barnes in a conference room, reviewing duty schedules with other security personnel. He was a solid-looking man in his late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that Lisa recognized in parents dealing with serious family crises. When Barnes saw Lisa and Kevin approaching, his face immediately went pale. His hands began shaking slightly, and he set down the papers he had been holding. "Sergeant Barnes, we need to speak with you privately." Lisa said in a gentle but firm tone. She had learned over the years that catching inside sources required patience and understanding, not aggressive interrogation. They found an empty office in the Palace Administrative Building. Barnes sat down heavily in a chair, placing his security badge and radio on the table between them. His shoulders sagged as if a heavy weight had been lifted from them. "I know why you're here," he said quietly, not meeting their eyes. "I've been expecting this conversation for weeks now. Every time my phone rings, every time someone knocks on my office door, I think this is it." Lisa sat across from him, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening. "Tell us about Victor Romano, Sergeant." Barnes looked up sharply, surprise and fear mixing in his expression. "You know his real name?" "I thought he was just some wealthy businessman who wanted to help families in medical trouble." "We know quite a lot about Victor Romano," Lisa replied. "What we need to understand is exactly what information you provided to him or his associates." The story came out slowly, piece by piece, like water leaking from a cracked dam. Barnes had been sitting in the waiting room of a private cancer clinic 6 months ago, watching his daughter receive chemotherapy, when a well-dressed man approached him. The stranger had been sympathetic and professional. He introduced himself as David Wilson, claiming to represent a wealthy businessman who preferred to remain anonymous but wanted to help families facing medical crises. He seemed to know all about Emma's condition and the financial pressure her treatment was putting on the Barnes family. He said his employer had been in a similar situation with his own child. Barnes explained, his voice barely above a whisper. He said they wanted to help other families avoid the same suffering. The initial requests had seemed harmless enough. Wilson asked basic questions about palace security. How many guards were on duty during public ceremonies? What time the shifts changed? General information that seemed innocent by itself. He made it sound like his employer was just curious about how royal protection worked. Barnes continued, like a wealthy person who might want to arrange similar security for his own family. But gradually, over the course of several months, the questions became more specific and detailed. Wilson wanted to know about security camera locations, communication protocols, emergency evacuation procedures. He asked about the specific plans for trooping the color ceremony, including guard positions and timing schedules. "Did you ever meet Victor Romano himself?" Kevin asked. Barnes shook his head. "I don't think so. Wilson was always the one who contacted me. Maybe 35 years old. Brown hair, spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't place, but very professional, very polite. He never made me feel like I was doing anything wrong." Lisa showed Barnes a photograph from their intelligence files. "Is this the man you dealt with?" Barnes studied the image and nodded immediately. "That's him. That's David Wilson." Lisa and Kevin exchanged glances. David Wilson was a known alias used by one of Victor's most trusted associates, a former intelligence operative who specialized in recruiting sources inside government organizations. "Sergeant Barnes, I need you to think very carefully about this next question," Lisa said, leaning forward. "What specific information about Saturday's ceremony did you provide to Wilson?" Barnes buried his face in his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with shame and regret. "Everything. Guard positions, timing schedules, radio frequencies, emergency protocols. I gave them a complete picture of how we protect the royal family during public events. The magnitude of the security breach was staggering. Victor didn't just have inside information about the ceremony. He had detailed intelligence about every aspect of how royal protection operated during major public events." "There's something else," Barnes said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Last week, Wilson asked me about something very specific. He wanted to know about viewing locations that would give someone a clear sightline to the ceremony, but wouldn't be covered by regular security sweeps." Lisa's heart began racing. "What did you tell him?" "I mentioned the old War Office building. There are offices on the upper floors that overlook Horse Guards directly. During ceremonies, those offices are usually empty because we deploy all available personnel to the parade ground itself." Kevin was already pulling up building blueprints on his phone. The War Office building was positioned perfectly for someone wanting an unobstructed view of the royal ceremony. More troubling, it would be an ideal location for a sniper or surveillance team. "Sergeant Barnes," Lisa said carefully, "you're going to continue your normal duties as if nothing has changed. If Wilson contacts you again, you're going to cooperate exactly as you have been. But from now on, you report every conversation to us immediately." Barnes looked up with confusion and hope. "You're not arresting me." Lisa looked at this broken man, thinking about his sick daughter and the impossible choices he had faced. "Right now, you're our best chance of understanding Victor's complete plan and stopping whatever he's preparing for Saturday. We need your help." The phone call came at exactly 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, just as Lisa was sitting at her desk reviewing surveillance footage from the previous night. She had been expecting Victor to make contact again, but hearing his actual voice still sent a chill down her spine. The voice was calm and educated, with just a hint of an Eastern European accent that had been softened by years of living in London. It was the voice of a man completely confident in his position, someone who had never doubted that this conversation would happen exactly when he wanted it to. "Inspector Chen, this is Victor Romano. I believe it's time we spoke face to face." Lisa's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. In 12 years of chasing this man across London, through dozens of investigations and countless near misses, she had never heard his actual voice. She quickly signaled to Kevin, who was sitting at the next desk, and he immediately started recording the call while tracing its source. "I'm listening," Lisa said, trying to keep her own voice steady and professional. "Good. I have a proposition that will benefit both of us, Inspector. Today at 2 p.m. I'll be waiting at the old Admiralty building. Come alone, but bring someone with the authority to make decisions at the highest levels of government." Lisa felt her heart rate increase. The old Admiralty building was one of the most secure locations in central London, just steps away from Downing Street and the Ministry of Defence. If Victor was suggesting a meeting there, he either had incredible confidence in his own security arrangements, or he was planning something far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. "Victor, I need guarantees that—" Lisa began, but the line went dead before she could finish her sentence. She stared at the phone for a moment, her mind racing through the implications. Victor Romano didn't do face-to-face meetings. He had built his entire criminal career on staying invisible, on never putting himself in situations where he could be captured or identified. The fact that he was now requesting a direct meeting meant something fundamental had changed in his situation. Within 30 minutes, Lisa found herself in an emergency briefing room at New Scotland Yard, surrounded by people whose decisions would affect the safety of thousands of innocent civilians. Chief Inspector Williams was pacing nervously around the conference table, while Agent Miller from MI5 studied building plans of the old Admiralty building. The most surprising presence in the room was Catherine Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive business suit who had introduced herself simply as someone from the Prime Minister's office who handles sensitive situations. Lisa could tell immediately that Catherine was accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. "This is completely unprecedented," Williams said, stopping his pacing to address the group. "Romano has avoided direct contact with law enforcement for 3 years. He's built his reputation on being untouchable, which means he's either desperate enough to take enormous risks, or he's completely confident that he can control the situation." Miller added grimly, "Neither option is particularly good news for us." Catherine Walsh had been quietly reviewing intelligence files during the discussion, but now she spoke with the calm authority of someone used to handling national crises. "We're going to take the meeting," she announced. Everyone in the room stared at her in surprise. "Ma'am, the security risks involved in—" Williams began. "Are outweighed by the intelligence opportunity," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "If Victor Romano wants to negotiate directly with the British government, we need to understand what he's offering and what he expects in return." At exactly 2 p.m., Lisa found herself walking through the historic corridors of the old Admiralty building, alongside Catherine Walsh. The building had served as headquarters for the Royal Navy for over 2 centuries, and its walls seemed to whisper with the weight of maritime history and state secrets. 2 armed security officers escorted them to a conference room on the 3rd floor, then positioned themselves outside the door with obvious professionalism. Inside the room, Victor Romano was already waiting, as if he had been there for hours. Lisa had studied his photographs for years, memorizing every detail of his appearance from grainy surveillance images. But seeing him in person was completely different. He was tall and well-built, wearing an expensive navy suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his intelligent gray eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room and its occupants. He looked more like a successful international businessman than Britain's most wanted criminal. "Inspector Chen, what a genuine pleasure to finally meet you," Victor said, standing and extending his hand as if this were a perfectly normal business meeting between colleagues. Lisa didn't shake his hand. "Let's skip the social pleasantries, Victor. Tell us what you want." Victor smiled at her directness and gestured for them to take seats around the polished conference table. "I appreciate people who don't waste time with unnecessary formalities." "Very well. Let me be equally direct about why we're here." He reached into his jacket pocket and Lisa tensed instinctively, but Victor only withdrew a sleek tablet computer. With a few quick taps on the screen, he brought up what appeared to be financial documents and official correspondence. "For the past 18 months, I've been carefully collecting information about certain British government officials and their private financial arrangements," Victor said in a conversational tone. "Offshore bank accounts, property investments made through shell companies, campaign contributions that weren't properly declared to the appropriate authorities." Catherine Walsh leaned forward slightly, her expression remaining carefully neutral despite the obvious implications. "Are you attempting to blackmail the British government, Mr. Romano?" "Blackmail is such an ugly and inaccurate word," Victor replied with apparent genuine offense. "I prefer to think of this as a mutually beneficial business negotiation between reasonable people." He scrolled through the documents on his tablet screen, and Lisa could see bank statements, property records, email communications, and what looked like recorded phone conversations between various officials and private companies. The defense secretary's wife, for example, owns substantial property in Monaco that was purchased with funds that cannot be traced to any legitimate source. Victor continued in the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather. "The health minister has been receiving monthly consulting payments from a pharmaceutical company, while simultaneously voting on drug approval, legislation that directly benefits that same company." Lisa realized with growing alarm that Victor wasn't showing them random examples of government corruption. These were carefully chosen officials whose scandals could potentially bring down the entire current administration. "What exactly are you proposing?" Catherine asked, her voice remaining steady despite the seriousness of the situation. "My proposal is remarkably simple," Victor said, closing the tablet and placing it on the table between them. "I want complete immunity from prosecution for all past activities, official documentation of a new legal identity, and guaranteed safe passage out of the United Kingdom within 72 hours. "And in exchange?" Victor's smile remained pleasant, but something cold and calculating flickered in his gray eyes. "In exchange, these documents and recordings disappear permanently, and London never sees or hears from me again. I retire to a quiet life somewhere with better weather and fewer complications." "What happens if we decline your generous offer?" Catherine asked. "Then these documents and recordings become public knowledge during Saturday's royal ceremony," Victor replied calmly. "International media representatives will be present, global attention will be focused on London, and the resulting political scandal will make Brexit negotiations look like a minor diplomatic disagreement." Lisa suddenly understood why Victor had chosen Trooping the Color for his timeline. The ceremony would attract journalists and camera crews from around the world. If damaging information about government corruption was released during such a high-profile international event, the political fallout would be devastating. "You have until Friday evening at 6 p.m. to provide confirmation of our arrangement," Victor continued. "If I don't receive satisfactory assurances by that deadline, the information will be released automatically through multiple news organizations simultaneously." Catherine Walsh had remained remarkably composed throughout Victor's presentation, but Lisa could see the tension in her shoulders and the slight tightening around her eyes. "How can we verify that these documents are authentic?" Catherine asked. "An excellent and entirely reasonable question," Victor said, tapping the tablet screen again. A new display appeared showing what looked like audio and video recordings. "I have comprehensive supporting evidence for every claim. Phone conversations, email correspondence, video surveillance footage, financial transaction records. Quite thorough documentation, really." He played a brief audio clip of what sounded like a senior government minister discussing kickback arrangements from a major construction project. The voice was clearly recognizable, even to Lisa, who didn't follow politics closely. "That represents perhaps 1% of the complete collection," Victor said. "The full documentation is considerably more extensive and detailed." The emergency meeting at Downing Street began at 7 p.m. that same evening, in a room that had witnessed countless national crises throughout British history. Lisa found herself sitting at a mahogany table that had probably hosted discussions about 2 world wars, economic disasters, and political scandals that had shaped the modern United Kingdom. Prime Minister Jonathan Hayes sat at the head of the table, his usually neat appearance showing signs of the stress that had been building throughout the day. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his normally perfectly styled hair looked like he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. Around the table sat some of the most powerful people in Britain. The Home Secretary, Margaret Collins, kept checking her phone nervously. The Defense Secretary, Robert Turner, was studying building security plans with obvious concern. The Director General of MI5, Elizabeth Harper, had brought a thick file of intelligence reports about Victor's criminal organization. "Let me make sure I understand this situation correctly," the Prime Minister said, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose decisions affected millions of lives. "Victor Romano claims to possess compromising information about members of my government, and he's threatening to release this information during Saturday's royal ceremony unless we grant him immunity and safe passage out of the country." "That's correct, sir," Catherine Walsh confirmed, consulting her detailed notes from the afternoon meeting. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that at least some of his documentation appears to be authentic." Lisa watched the faces around the table as this information sank in. These weren't just government officials making abstract policy decisions. They were real people whose careers, reputations, and families could be destroyed if Victor's information became public knowledge. The Defense Secretary leaned forward with obvious anxiety. "What specific information does Romano claim to have about us?" Catherine flipped through her notes carefully. Financial irregularities involving offshore accounts, undisclosed business relationships with private companies, campaign finance violations that weren't properly reported. In most cases, nothing that would constitute actual criminal behavior, but certainly enough to cause significant political damage. "Political damage," the Home Secretary repeated with bitter irony in her voice. "That's a diplomatic way of saying it could completely destroy the current government." The Director General of MI5 had been quietly reviewing intelligence files during the discussion, but now she spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to dealing with threats to national security. "We need to consider this situation from a much broader perspective," Elizabeth said firmly. "If we negotiate with Romano and give him what he's demanding, we establish a dangerous precedent. Every criminal with access to sensitive information will expect similar treatment in the future. And if we refuse to negotiate," the Prime Minister replied grimly, "we risk a massive political scandal that could destabilize British politics for years to come." Lisa realized she was witnessing something that most people never saw, the moment when national leaders had to choose between competing disasters. There were no good options available, only different degrees of potential damage. "What about the ceremony itself?" asked Air Chief Marshal Thompson, who was responsible for coordinating security during major royal events. "Can we postpone Trooping the Color or move it to a more secure location?" "Absolutely not," the Prime Minister said with immediate firmness. "Changing the ceremony at this point would signal weakness and give Romano exactly the kind of public attention he's seeking. Besides, Her Majesty has already approved all the arrangements." The mention of the Queen brought another complicated dimension to the crisis. Buckingham Palace had been briefed about the general security threat, but the specific details about potential government corruption had been kept confidential. The royal family trusted their elected government to handle such sensitive matters discreetly and effectively. Catherine Walsh raised another troubling concern. "We also need to consider the possibility that Romano isn't acting alone in this blackmail scheme. Our intelligence sources suggest he may be receiving protection and support from foreign operatives. This could be part of a larger operation designed to destabilize British democratic institutions." Lisa had been thinking along similar lines throughout the day. Victor's confidence and willingness to take such enormous risks suggested he had backup plans and protection that went far beyond his own criminal organization. "Inspector Chen," the Prime Minister said, addressing her directly for the first time, "you've been tracking Romano longer than anyone else in this room. What's your professional assessment of his credibility and intentions?" Lisa chose her words very carefully, knowing that her opinion might influence decisions that would affect the entire country. Victor Romano has built his reputation on never making threats he couldn't carry out. If he says he has this information, then he definitely has it. If he says he'll release it publicly, then he absolutely will follow through. What about his offer to leave the country permanently? That part I believe completely, Lisa said with confidence. Our intelligence suggests he's facing serious pressure from rival criminal organizations. This deal would solve multiple problems for him simultaneously. It gets him safe passage out of Britain while eliminating all his legal troubles. The defense secretary spoke up again, his voice tight with anxiety. What if we simply call his bluff? Arrest Romano before Friday evening and seize whatever evidence he claims to have? Agent Miller from MI5, who had been quiet during most of the discussion, shook his head firmly. We have no idea where he's actually keeping the documents and recordings. Victor has certainly arranged for automatic release if anything happens to him. Attempting to arrest Romano might trigger exactly the scandal we're trying to prevent. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as everyone contemplated their limited options. Lisa could see the enormous weight of responsibility etched into every face around the table. There's another factor we absolutely must consider, Elizabeth Harper said quietly. The international implications of this situation. Foreign intelligence services are certainly aware of Romano's activities and capabilities. If this information becomes public, it won't just damage domestic British politics. It could seriously affect our relationships with allies and trading partners around the world. The Prime Minister rubbed his temples, clearly feeling the pressure of making an impossible decision under severe time constraints. What would the immunity arrangement actually look like in practical terms? Catherine Walsh had obviously prepared for this question. Romano would be required to provide all documentation and evidence to us first, as proof of good faith and authenticity. We would then arrange new identity documents and secure transportation to a non-extradition country of his choosing. In exchange, all current criminal charges would be permanently dropped and sealed. So, we'd be trusting a master criminal to honor his word and disappear forever, the Home Secretary said with obvious skepticism. Actually, Lisa interjected, Victor has always honored his business agreements. It's part of how he built his reputation in the criminal underworld. If he promises to disappear permanently, he'll definitely keep that promise. The meeting continued for another 3 hours, with participants exploring every possible scenario and option. Military solutions were discussed and quickly dismissed. The risk of civilian casualties during any operation near central London was completely unacceptable. Diplomatic approaches were considered, perhaps involving Romano's country of origin, but ruled out due to the severe time constraints they were facing. As the clock approached midnight, the Prime Minister finally called for a final decision. We're going to pursue a dual strategy, he announced with grim determination. Officially, we'll begin negotiating Romano's demands and appear to be moving toward accepting his terms. Simultaneously and secretly, we'll prepare a comprehensive operation to apprehend him during Saturday's ceremony. Inspector Chen, you'll coordinate with all security services to plan and execute this operation. Lisa felt a cold weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Sir, the risks involved in any operation during a royal ceremony with thousands of civilians present are significant but manageable, the Prime Minister finished firmly. However, they are outweighed by the risks of establishing a precedent of negotiating with criminal blackmailers. We cannot and will not be held hostage by threats from organized crime. As the meeting finally ended, and officials began filing out into the London night, Lisa remained behind with Catherine, Walsh and Elizabeth Harper to discuss the practical details of what would need to happen over the next 48 hours. This operation is going to be incredibly dangerous for everyone involved, Lisa said quietly. If something goes wrong during the ceremony, the consequences could be far worse than any political scandal. I understand that completely, Elizabeth replied. But we simply cannot establish a precedent of giving in to blackmail demands. If Romano succeeds with this scheme, dozens of other criminals will attempt similar operations. Catherine Walsh was already planning the immediate next steps. We'll send Romano a carefully worded message tomorrow morning. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, brilliant blue skies and gentle temperatures that would draw even larger crowds than usual to Horse Guards Parade. Lisa stood on the roof of the old War Office building at 5 a.m., watching the sun rise over London and thinking about how this beautiful day might end in complete disaster. The city looked peaceful from her elevated position, with early morning joggers making their way through St. James's Park and delivery trucks beginning their daily routes. But Lisa knew that beneath this calm surface, the most complex security operation in recent British history was already in motion. Below her, hundreds of personnel were taking their positions for what would appear to be a normal royal ceremony, but was actually an elaborate trap designed to capture one of Europe's most dangerous criminals. Military personnel in bright red dress uniforms were arranging themselves in precise formations, while plainclothes police officers disguised as tourists began filtering into the areas where spectators would gather. Lisa's earpiece crackled, constantly with updates from teams positioned throughout central London. Every voice carried the same underlying tension. Everyone knew that today could go very right or very wrong, with no middle ground. Alpha team reporting from the Langham Hotel, came Agent Miller's voice through her radio. Target location remains under full surveillance. Thermal imaging still shows at least 4 individuals in the penthouse suite. Bravo team in position at Horse Guard's entrance points, reported Kevin Park, who was coordinating crowd security from a mobile command post. No unusual activity detected in the early crowd arrivals. Lisa adjusted her own disguise carefully. She was dressed as a royal protection officer, complete with the radio equipment, confident bearing, and subtle earpiece that would allow her to move freely through restricted areas without attracting attention. Only the senior command team knew her real identity and mission. The Langham Hotel's penthouse suite had been under constant surveillance since Thursday evening, when Victor had supposedly agreed to begin negotiating their proposed arrangement. Advanced thermal imaging equipment confirmed that at least 4 people were in the suite, but heavy curtains prevented visual confirmation of Victor's actual presence. Charlie team reports movement in the target suite. Came another radio update that made Lisa's pulse quicken. Someone just opened the curtains facing Horse Guards parade. Lisa looked across the distance toward the luxury hotel. Even from her position over half a mile away, she could clearly see the large windows of the penthouse suite. If Victor was planning something from that location, he now had an unobstructed view of the entire ceremony preparation area. By 8 a.m., the first excited tourists were arriving at Horse Guard's parade. Families with young children, elderly couples carrying folding chairs, enthusiastic visitors from around the world, all completely unaware that they were walking into what might become a dangerous crime scene. Lisa watched them through high-powered binoculars, scanning faces and behaviors, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. "Inspector, we have a serious problem." Kevin's voice came through her earpiece with obvious alarm. Hotel security just reported that the penthouse suite at the Langham was completely evacuated 25 minutes ago. All occupants left through the service entrance in the basement. Lisa felt her stomach drop like a stone. Victor had anticipated their surveillance operation and moved his entire team to an unknown location. "Do we have any idea where they went?" "Negative. They used a maintenance tunnel that connects directly to the underground system. We lost all visual contact. This changed everything about their carefully planned operation." Lisa had been counting on Victor being in a known monitored location where they could observe and control the developing situation. Now he could be anywhere in central London, with a clear view of Horse Guards and potential access to thousands of innocent targets. "All teams, switch to maximum alert status immediately," Lisa commanded through her radio network. "Victor Romano is mobile with unknown location. Assume he has visual contact with the ceremony area and is prepared to execute whatever he's been planning." The morning continued with steadily building tension. By 10 a.m., over 8,000 spectators had gathered around Horse Guard's parade. Military bands were warming up with cheerful music, creating a festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the anxiety Lisa felt radiating through her security. Communications network, Delta. "Team has identified 3 suspicious individuals. Near the Treasury building," came a report from one of the roving surveillance teams. Adult males all carrying large camera bags displaying nervous behavior patterns. "Investigate carefully but do not approach directly," Lisa ordered. "Victor specializes in misdirection and false targets. Those individuals might be deliberate decoys designed to waste our resources." Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, the royal family was making their final preparations for the ceremony. The Queen, completely unaware of the criminal drama unfolding around her official birthday celebration, was reviewing the detailed ceremony schedule with her private secretary and discussing last-minute adjustments to the timing. Lisa's earpiece buzzed with an update from Agent Thompson, who was monitoring all radio communications in the area. "Inspector, we're detecting increased encrypted radio chatter from multiple unknown sources. At least 6 different frequencies, all using military-grade encryption, all transmitting from within a 2-mile radius of Horse Guards. Victor's team is definitely coordinating something major," Lisa realized with growing concern. "How many different transmission sources can you identify?" "At least 8, possibly more. They're using sophisticated equipment and changing frequencies every few minutes to avoid detection. This is professional-level operational security." At 10:30 a.m., Lisa received the phone call she had been dreading since the operation began. Chief Inspector Williams contacted her directly with news that made an already complex situation even more dangerous. "Lisa, we just received another message from Victor. He knows we're not negotiating in good faith with him." Lisa's blood ran cold. "What exactly did he say?" Quote, "Inspector Chen, you've positioned your pieces well on the chessboard, but you're still playing the wrong game entirely. The real show begins when the Queen's carriage arrives at Horse Guards." Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Victor wasn't just aware of their operation. He seemed to be enjoying the cat-and-mouse game. His specific reference to the Queen's carriage meant he was targeting the most visible and vulnerable moment of the entire ceremony. "Sir, we need to seriously recommend postponing the Queen's public appearance," Lisa said urgently. "Already discussed with the palace security team. Her Majesty absolutely refuses to be intimidated by criminal threats. The ceremony will proceed exactly as planned." By 11 a.m., the crowds had swelled to over 10,000 people from around the world. International media crews had set up their cameras and broadcasting equipment, and the parade ground was filled with the spectacular display of British military pageantry. Lisa moved through the dense crowd, her trained eyes constantly scanning faces and behaviors, looking for anything unusual or threatening. Echo Team reports highly suspicious activity at St. James's Park Underground Station. Came another urgent radio update. Large group of men in identical business suits, all carrying matching briefcases, clearly coordinating their movements. How many individuals? 8 men total. They arrived separately on different trains but are obviously working together as a team. Lisa realized that Victor had created exactly the scenario he wanted. Multiple potential threats scattered across central London, forcing the security services to spread their resources dangerously thin. Every suspicious sighting required immediate investigation, but most would probably turn out to be innocent civilians or deliberate distractions. "All team leaders, listen to me very carefully," Lisa broadcast to her entire security network. "Victor Romano's primary specialty is making us react to threats that aren't real, while the actual threat develops completely undetected. Stay focused on the main objective, protecting the royal family and preventing whatever Victor is actually planning." At 11:15 a.m., the Queen's magnificent carriage procession began its traditional journey from Buckingham Palace toward Horse Guards Parade. Lisa watched from her elevated position as the spectacular golden coach, pulled by 8 perfectly trained horses and surrounded by mounted guards in full ceremonial dress, made its stately way through London's historic streets. Thousands of people lined the entire route, cheering enthusiastically and waving small British flags. Camera crews broadcast the magnificent spectacle to millions of viewers around the world. It was exactly the kind of high-profile, internationally visible event that would amplify whatever Victor had been planning. "Inspector," came Kevin's voice through her earpiece with barely controlled excitement. "We have confirmed visual identification of Victor Romano." Lisa's heart rate spiked dramatically. "Where exactly?" "He's standing in the crowd at Horse Guards approximately 50 meters from the main royal viewing stands. Wearing a dark gray suit standing next to a woman with shoulder-length dark hair. They appear to be behaving like ordinary spectators." Lisa immediately trained her high-powered binoculars on the location Kevin had indicated. Lisa pushed through the dense crowd of excited spectators, her eyes locked on Victor's position 50 meters away. Around her, thousands of people were cheering and pointing their cameras as the Queen's Guard began their spectacular ceremonial march onto Horse Guards Parade. The bright red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats created a magnificent display that had tourists reaching for their phones and children climbing on their parents' shoulders for better views. "Inspector, something's not right about this." Kevin's voice crackled through her earpiece with obvious concern. Victor isn't trying to hide or escape. He's just standing there watching the ceremony like any normal tourist. Lisa paused behind a group of elderly tourists, using them as cover while she studied Victor through her binoculars. Kevin was absolutely right. Victor's behavior was completely wrong for someone planning a major crime. He looked relaxed, almost peaceful, occasionally pointing out interesting details of the ceremony to the dark-haired woman beside him. "Something's definitely not adding up here," Lisa muttered into her radio. "This is way too easy. Victor Romano doesn't make himself this visible unless he has a very specific reason." "All teams in position and ready," came the report from Agent Miller. "We can take him into custody whenever you give the order, Inspector." But Lisa hesitated, her years of experience tracking Victor warning her that nothing was ever as straightforward as it appeared. If Victor was allowing himself to be seen so clearly after 3 years of perfect invisibility, there had to be an important reason behind his behavior. That's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold with realization. Victor raised his hand slightly and gave a small, deliberate wave, not to anyone in the crowd around him, but toward the upper floors of a government building directly behind the royal viewing platform. Lisa spun around and followed his gaze upward. The old Admiralty building rose behind the ceremonial area, its many windows reflecting the bright morning sunlight. Most of the windows appeared empty, as expected during a weekend ceremony when the building would be largely unoccupied. But on the 4th floor, one window was open just a crack. "Sniper," Lisa shouted into her radio with urgent alarm. "All teams, we have a potential sniper position in the Admiralty building, 4th floor. Immediate response required." The reaction was swift and professional. Security teams began moving rapidly toward the building, while others formed protective barriers around the royal viewing area. But Lisa realized with growing horror that they might already be too late to prevent whatever was about to happen. The Queen's golden carriage was approaching Horse Guards Parade, just minutes away from the moment when Her Majesty would step out into the open and take her position for the ceremony. Thousands of spectators were cheering enthusiastically, completely unaware of the deadly danger potentially developing above them. "Echo team moving into the Admiralty building immediately," came Agent Thompson's voice through the radio. "Elevator access has been disabled from the inside. We're taking the emergency stairs." Lisa kept watching Victor through her binoculars, trying to understand his strategy. Instead of looking concerned about the massive security response his wave had triggered, he seemed almost relieved. His posture had changed from confident and alert to something that looked more like resignation or acceptance. "Inspector Chen." Victor's familiar voice suddenly came through her earpiece, somehow using her own secure radio frequency. "I think it's finally time we finished our long conversation properly." Lisa's heart nearly stopped beating. Victor had somehow accessed their supposedly secure communication channel. "How are you?" "Modern technology is truly wonderful, isn't it?" Victor interrupted calmly. "Inspector, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Look closely at the woman standing next to me." Lisa focused her binoculars on Victor's companion with new attention. She was attractive, probably in her early 30s with dark hair and expensive clothing that suggested wealth and education. But something about her posture, the way she held herself and scanned the crowd, suggested professional military or police training. "Her name is Agent Rebecca Hayes," Victor continued in the same calm tone. "She works for Interpol's Organized Crime Division, and she's been tracking my activities across 3 different countries for the past 18 months. She's also the primary reason I can't simply disappear quietly like I used to do." Lisa felt the pieces of a much larger and more complex puzzle beginning to fall into place in her mind. Victor wasn't just running from British law enforcement. He was caught between multiple international agencies and dangerous criminal organizations, all of whom wanted him for completely different reasons. "Echo team has reached the 4th floor," came Thompson's urgent voice through the radio. "We found the open window, but there's no sniper here. Just sophisticated surveillance equipment pointed directly at the parade ground." "Because there never was any sniper," Victor said, clearly listening to all their communications. "Inspector, I need you to understand something very important. I'm not here to hurt anyone or disrupt this ceremony. I'm here to surrender myself to custody." Lisa stared across the crowd at Victor, trying to process what she was hearing. Surrender? After all this elaborate planning? For 3 long years, I've been running from people who are much more dangerous than the British police, Victor explained patiently. Former business partners who believe I stole money from them. Foreign intelligence services who want to force me to work as their asset. Criminal organizations that see me as a liability who knows too much about their operations. The Queen's magnificent carriage had arrived at Horse Guards Parade. Lisa could see the beautiful horses being brought to a careful halt as ceremonial guards in their dress uniforms prepared to assist Her Majesty from the ornate coach. In just minutes, she would be standing in the open air, completely exposed if Victor's story wasn't completely true. "Inspector," Agent Rebecca Hayes' voice came through the radio. She had clearly been monitoring their entire conversation. "Victor Romano has been cooperating with Interpol as an informant for the past 6 months. The blackmail scheme, the corruption threats, this dramatic public appearance, it was all carefully designed to force a highly visible arrest that would guarantee his long-term protection." Lisa felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding of the entire situation. "What about the government documents? The evidence of corruption you claim to have? That information is completely real," Victor admitted without hesitation. "But I never had any intention of releasing it publicly. I needed British intelligence services to believe the threat was genuine and immediate, so they would take my surrender seriously. So you created an elaborate hoax just to force us to arrest you publicly?" "Not a hoax, Inspector," Victor corrected her carefully. "A very sophisticated performance. You see, if I had simply walked into New Scotland Yard and surrendered quietly, certain interested parties would have arranged for me to have an unfortunate accident before I could provide testimony against anyone important." Lisa was beginning to understand the brilliant complexity of Victor's strategy. "But if you're arrested dramatically during a royal ceremony, with international media present and thousands of witnesses—" "Exactly right," Victor confirmed. "Any attempt to harm me after such a visible, well-documented arrest would raise far too many awkward questions." The Queen had stepped gracefully from her carriage and was walking toward the reviewing stand. Surrounded by ceremonial guards and protection officers, the crowds were cheering enthusiastically, and camera crews were broadcasting every moment to viewers around the world. "All teams, stand down on the building search," Lisa ordered through her radio. "Victor Romano is surrendering voluntarily. Approach his position calmly and professionally. We don't want to cause panic among the civilian spectators." As Lisa began walking toward Victor's location through the dense crowd, she had to admire the incredible sophistication of his plan. He had created a threat serious enough to mobilize Britain's entire security apparatus, but designed it so that the only possible resolution was his own capture, under the most secure circumstances imaginable. "Inspector Chen," Victor said as she approached through the crowd, his hands raised slightly in a clear gesture of peaceful surrender. "Thank you for playing your part so excellently in this performance." Agent Hayes stepped forward professionally, producing handcuffs and an official Interpol arrest warrant. "Victor Romano, you are under arrest for international money laundering, conspiracy, fraud, and violation of multiple extradition orders." As the handcuffs clicked into place with finality, Victor looked genuinely peaceful for the first time since Lisa had been tracking him. Around them, the magnificent ceremony continued with all its traditional pageantry, the crowd still cheering and waving flags, completely unaware that they had just witnessed the end of one of Europe's most sophisticated criminal careers. "Inspector," Victor said quietly, as Agent Hayes began leading him away through the crowd, "the real documents about government corruption are stored in a safety deposit box in Geneva. The key and detailed location information are in my hotel room at the Savoy. Consider it a farewell gift to British justice." Lisa watched as Victor Romano disappeared into the crowd. 6 months later, Lisa sat across from Victor Romano in a secure interview room at Belmarsh Prison. The maximum security facility was known for housing Britain's most dangerous criminals, but today it felt more like a quiet office building than a place of punishment. Victor looked different now. The expensive suits had been replaced with standard prison clothing. His silver hair had grown longer and was less perfectly styled. He appeared thinner, but his eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had made him such a formidable opponent for so many years. "You've been quite busy, haven't you?" Lisa said, placing a thick manila file on the metal table between them. "Your testimony has helped us shut down money laundering operations in 12 different countries." Victor smiled slightly. "The same. confident expression she remembered from their first face-to-face meeting at the old Admiralty building. "I told you that surrendering publicly would be beneficial for everyone involved. The British government gets to claim a major victory over organized crime. Interpol closes dozens of international cases that had been open for years, and I get to live long enough to enjoy my retirement, such as it is in this place." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of revelations and legal proceedings. Victor's cooperation with law enforcement agencies had indeed led to the dismantling of criminal networks across Europe. His detailed knowledge of offshore banking, systems, smuggling routes, and corrupt officials had proven invaluable to investigators around the world. "The documents you mentioned back then," Lisa said, opening her notebook, "the ones about British government corruption, were they really just fabricated to make your threat seem more serious?" "Not fabricated at all," Victor corrected her firmly. "Simply presented in a way that made them appear more damaging than they actually were. Yes, there were some questionable financial arrangements among certain British politicians, but nothing that would have actually brought down the government or resulted in criminal charges." Lisa had to admit she was genuinely impressed by the sophistication of Victor's final scheme. He had successfully manipulated everyone: the police, MI5, government officials, even international agencies, into giving him exactly what he needed: a safe, highly visible arrest that guaranteed his protection from more dangerous enemies. "There's something I've been wondering about for months," Lisa said, leaning back in her chair. "Why Horse Guards Parade specifically? Why make such an elaborate public spectacle of your surrender?" Victor leaned back thoughtfully, a distant look coming into his eyes. "Do you understand what that ceremony represents, Inspector? It's a celebration of tradition, order, and the continuity of British institutions that have endured for centuries. I spent my entire adult life working against those very institutions, profiting from chaos and disorder, and the breakdown of legitimate systems." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I suppose in the end I wanted to surrender to something that represented stability and permanence rather than the temporary chaos I had created throughout my career." "And the blackmail threats? The fear you deliberately created among government officials?" "Pure theater," Victor admitted without any shame. "But highly effective theater, as you saw. Fear makes people act quickly and decisively. If I had simply requested political asylum or police protection through normal diplomatic channels, the bureaucracy would have taken months to respond while my enemies tracked me down." Lisa reviewed her detailed notes from that chaotic Saturday morning 6 months ago. "Agent Hayes from Interpol, she was working with you the entire time, wasn't she?" "Rebecca approached me 8 months ago in Prague," Victor explained. "She offered me a simple choice: continue running from place to place until someone inevitably killed me, or cooperate with international law enforcement in exchange for guaranteed protection." When she presented it that way, it wasn't a particularly difficult decision to make. The interview room door opened, and Agent Rebecca Hayes herself entered. She looked much more relaxed than she had during the ceremony, dressed in a simple business suit instead of the tourist disguise she had worn at Horse Guards Parade. "Inspector Chen, good to see you again under less stressful circumstances," Rebecca said warmly, taking a seat next to Lisa. "I wanted to update both of you on the final results of Victor's cooperation with our investigation." She opened her own, thick file, filled with arrest reports, asset seizure documents, and international legal proceedings. "In the past 6 months, we've arrested 47 individuals directly connected to Victor's former criminal organization. We've seized over £200 million in illegal assets, shut down 23 shell companies, and closed major money laundering operations in banks across 8 different countries." Victor listened to this detailed accounting of his former empire's complete destruction with apparent satisfaction and relief. "It's quite liberating, actually. For decades, I had to constantly worry about betrayal from associates, violence from competitors, and pursuit by law enforcement. Now my biggest daily concern is whether the prison library has received the new biography of Winston Churchill that I requested." Lisa found herself in the strange position of almost feeling sorry for this man who had caused her so much professional frustration over the years. "Do you ever regret the choices you made during your criminal career?" Victor considered the question very carefully before answering. I genuinely regret that innocent people were sometimes hurt by my actions and decisions. I don't regret doing whatever was necessary to survive in a world that gave me very few legitimate options when I was younger. But I'm truly glad that chapter of my life is finally over. The safety deposit box in Geneva that you mentioned, Lisa said, consulting her notes. Did it really contain authentic evidence of government corruption? It contained some genuinely interesting financial documents, Victor replied with a slight smile. Nothing that would shock anyone familiar with modern politics, but perhaps enough to encourage certain officials to be more careful with their business arrangements in the future. Agent Hayes closed her file and stood up to leave. Victor has approximately 3 more years of testimony and legal proceedings ahead of him. After that, he'll be transferred to a minimum security facility with a completely new identity and protection for the rest of his natural life. As they prepared to end the interview, Victor called out to Lisa one final time. Inspector, I have one last confession to make. Lisa turned back, curious despite everything they had already discussed. I actually enjoyed our extended game of cat and mouse over the years. You were the only police officer who ever came close to truly understanding how I operated and thinking the way I thought. In another life, under different circumstances, we might have been working on the same side. Lisa looked at this complex, intelligent man who had been her professional obsession for over a decade. In another life, Victor, you might have made an excellent detective yourself. Walking through the prison corridors toward the exit, Lisa reflected on how strangely and unexpectedly the case had finally ended. She had spent years trying to catch Victor Romano through traditional police work, and in the end, he had engineered his own capture as part of an elaborate plan to save his life and systematically dismantle the criminal networks he had once controlled. The media had portrayed his arrest as a tremendous triumph of British law enforcement, and technically that description was accurate. But Lisa knew the real story was much more complicated, a story about a master criminal who had grown tired of running and had chosen to end his career entirely on his own terms. Outside the prison, normal London life continued exactly as always. Tourists still gathered daily at Horse Guards Parade to watch the changing of the guard ceremony. Government officials still worked in their offices around Whitehall. The city's ancient rhythms continued unchanged, largely unaware that one of its most notorious criminals had finally found a kind of peace behind bars. Lisa drove back to New Scotland Yard, where new criminal cases were already waiting on her desk. But sometimes, late at night when she was reviewing files on other complex investigations, she would think about Victor Romano and wonder if any future criminals would prove as clever, as patient, or as ultimately human as the man who had orchestrated the most elaborate surrender in modern British criminal history. The big boss had made his final public appearance at Horse Guards Parade, and in the end, everyone involved had gotten exactly what they needed: justice and closure for law enforcement, safety and protection for Victor, and resolution for one of the longest criminal pursuits in contemporary British history. It wasn't the dramatic ending anyone had originally expected, but perhaps it was the ending that everyone involved truly deserved after so many years of dangerous games.